and welcome to this episode of the Love Procurement Podcast. My name is Kelly Barner, and I'll be your host for today's conversation. Now, I'm glad to welcome to this interview Adele Bleakley. Adele is a procurement manager for Sainsburys and was recently recognized as the highly commended Young Talent winner at the 2024 CIPS Excellence in Procurement and Supply Awards. So, hi, Adele. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, we talked about the fact, and congratulations, that you've been recognized by CIPS, as well as the fact that you work at Sainsburys. But what else might it be interesting for people to know about your professional experience to date?
Perfect. So thank you, Kelly. And again, thank you for having me. So just a little bit about myself. So, I graduated from Nottingham Trent University back in 2018. Feels like a lifetime ago now. And I started on a graduate scheme at Nissan Motor Corporation. So I was there for 3 years on a grad program. And then I moved into some procurement consulting for around 8 months and decided actually I want to go back into a big organisation again, and landed the role at Sainsburys in June 2022. So I've been here for just over 2.5 years now. I originally started in the marketing and insight space and worked on a range of projects there, and then recently was promoted into Procurement Manager in around July this year. So I've taken on a few more meatier categories in the creative, PR, production space, whilst also maintaining customer insights. So that's my career history so far.
Well, one of the things, staying on theme, that we like to ask all of our guests right up front is, what is something that you love about working in procurement?
I would say I know it probably sounds really cliche, but every day is very different. You do work with such a range of different people. Yeah. And I mean, it's Sainsbury's as well. Like, the stakeholders are amazing who we work with. So every day is different, work with different stakeholders every single day. And especially at Sainsbury's, procurement are very much that strategic partner to our stakeholders. And I really enjoy being able to support them on sourcing projects, or helping them with negotiations, or really just trying to make sure that we streamline our processes within procurement especially. So yeah, I think it's just all around collaboratively working with our stakeholders for sure.
Now, sort of building on the experience that you shared around your background, I'm curious about which was a bigger adjustment. Moving from the automotive industry at Nissan to retail with Sainsburys, or at a category level, shifting your focus from vehicle powertrains to marketing services. Both of those on both levels are very different areas to work in. Which one was a bigger adjustment?
Yeah, both very different adjustments, but I would probably say on a category level. So obviously in Nissan, I focus more on the powertrain and the vendor tooling side of things. And at Nissan, everything is very much focused on reducing costs. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that the entry ticket for that car is going to be the cheapest cost for our consumers. Whereas switching it around, going into marketing, it's very different. You don't have essentially an end product that you can see. So it's really focusing on that kind of cost versus value, and where we can deliver that value for the customer. A lot of the time, everything is quite hypothetical. You're working with agencies to maybe build out a big order form or puts things into the contract of what's going to be delivered, and we're having to put this down on paper maybe a year in advance of what we really know what's going to happen. So a lot of it is around like the hypothetical thinking and always having that end customer in mind. So I do think the shift from kind of that powertrain into marketing, super different on that kind of cost versus value aspect for sure.
And that is interesting. Even in my own background, which ironically was also in grocery retail, there is no faster way to lose the attention of a marketing team than to say the S word, which is savings, right? Instantly, the eyes glaze. People start politely looking at watches, thinking these guys don't get it. Marketing has a very different set of business objectives that they're trying to get out of contracts, out of supplier relationships, out of the money that they're spending. When you think about what you've learned, and clearly you're doing it successfully, if you're picking up more categories in the marketing area, as you try to support value for money and the decision-making process, orienting around value rather than savings, what have you learned along the way, whether it's actually doing some different things or whether it's using different language and terminology to talk about the same things that procurement would be doing in any category?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, like you say, that savings word in marketing is very different than like in the
Yes.
automotive industry, because I think in marketing, the more you put in, the more you get out. It's very much a revenue generation
Yeah.
area, and I think it's being able to portray that to your stakeholders and say that this is the value that we are going to be delivering, or to the senior stakeholders and say that we really need to put this investment in. This is what we're getting out of it. And I think that's really key when it does come to working on your contracts or working on the services aspect of it, of really digging down deep with your partners who you are going to be working with, to really strip out the value that you know you're going to get from that and
Yeah.
have it down on paper. I think that's really key as part of that kind of sourcing as you're going through. Whereas with the automotive side of it, we can say, let's strip this for this, and we're able to kind of definitely see where the value is being driven. Whereas I think it does really feed through within marketing to really get your stakeholders on side and that influencing side of things, for sure.
And yet it doesn't necessarily have to mean allowing marketing to go ahead and do whatever they want. Procurement can still introduce new ideas, challenge ways that things have been done in the past. Have you seen opportunities within this grouping of categories to disrupt the status quo in ways that are constructive, that allow that relationship between procurement and marketing to both exist and even strengthen, but where you're still bringing in some new ideas to take the value they're already receiving and potentially even increase it?
Yeah, for sure. I think especially at Sainsbury's, we're very much, like we said previously, we are very much that strategic partner for our stakeholders, and we do have a voice at the table, which I think is really nice. I think maybe previously procurement might have been seen as more of a kind of clerical role, whereas now I think that shift, which we'll probably go on to later, is like how we've moved from that kind of clerical kind of admin role to more of that strategic partner for our stakeholders. And I really think that we do have a seat at the table and are able to kind of say our views on certain things as we see things progress. We are able to challenge our stakeholders and say, what's this value really driving for the business? Or we need to be thinking about the end customer at the end of the day. Does that value within what we're doing drive that for the customer? And I think because we've got such good rapport with all of our stakeholders, they do take that on board, and we are able to challenge them in certain situations. I think as well, like we have end-to-end ownership of our categories. We understand our suppliers, we understand what they do, and we're able to say, if a stakeholder comes to us and says, oh, actually, we want to be working with X supplier, I say, actually, I'm sure we're working with someone very similar in another category on this. Can we look at maybe consolidating, or could we have a look at maybe just onboarding that one supplier rather than two, and see if we can, streamline that process? So I think procurement having that kind of end-to-end management as well really gives us that leverage to have that seat at the table and be able to work collaboratively with our stakeholders.
So it's good to have that strong stakeholder relationship, especially where it allows for collaboration and challenging. But let's go into the other piece of that as well, because the other opportunity you get when you're working in marketing service is I'm sure to work with amazing suppliers and supplier representatives that basically have the same business objectives in mind that you and the stakeholders do. They're also value oriented. They're also looking for constructive, creative ways to challenge the status quo and bring in additional value. How would you describe the relationships, the supplier representatives that you have the opportunity to work with in these categories and the value that they help bring?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously we're a strategic partner to our stakeholders, but I think as part of that, obviously we have the supplier base that we work with. And I think having a strategic supplier who we work with is so important. And I think having that strategic partner means a win-win for both Sainsburys and for both our suppliers as well. So procurement are very heavy on being fair with our suppliers of who we work with, and ensuring that both of us are getting value out of it, because I think a strategic partnership doesn't work one way, it has to be both. And whoever we've worked with in the past to say, look, this is our Sainsbury's strategy for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, etc. There's no one that's not been on board. And I think everyone is striving to take that next step. And I think it excites our suppliers when they can see what we're working with, and they really want to come on the journey with us. And when we understand from our side what their strategy is and where they're wanting to be in the next 5 years, being able to bring that together is super important. And I think that just kind of creates a winning team, essentially, of the stakeholders, the procurement, and also the supplier base as well.
Well, I think one of the challenges within marketing spend, and this is something that I'm sure you and stakeholders and suppliers at times all work on together, is the fact that when you're trying to create savings in other categories, you can come up with a number. When you are buying the components for a powertrain, you can talk about length, you can talk about weight, you can talk about specific alloys. When you get into value, you're never going to be able to say, well, what is the value? 12. Or what is the value, right? A very specific color number. Do you find that having these conversations with suppliers and sort of the three-pointed relationship, so procurement, stakeholder, supplier, helps communicate something of a definition of value to the business, that it helps to be able to talk about, even if value isn't as concrete as 12, there's still something very discernible or visible or measurable, that it helps all of you find the language to tell stakeholders and the rest of the business the benefit that's being derived from this specific relationship?
Yeah, definitely. I think when we maybe start conversations with an agency, we are here, they might be here, and it's being able to bridge that gap, and we're both on the same wavelength. And I think it speaks volumes for Sainsbury's, because I think the company is very good at being able to portray what our strategy is. And I think you could ask anyone in Sainsbury's and everyone's very clear on what our 3-year strategy is and putting the customer at the forefront of that. And I think we're able to portray that quite well to our suppliers of who we're working with, to really be able to bridge that gap of where we're trying to get to. And I think having them conversations, being transparent with our suppliers, we'll really be able to bridge that gap and bring both in line. And essentially we're able to kind of filter all our ideas. We're coming in from one side, suppliers coming in from another, and then we're able to really drill down into what the value we're wanting to get out of this, and what's the strategic partnership going to deliver, where do we want to be, how are we going to get there. And I think that's when we can really put our heads together and get it down on a piece of paper and say, right, this is the value that we're going to drive from this, and then we're able to influence the rest of the business as part of that.
You know, one of the things that I always appreciated from my time in retail is that we're also all consumers. So we might be in procurement helping manage marketing services or some form of direct or indirect spend, but the experience of that and the connection to it on an individual level can be much stronger when the industry that you're in is retail. I'd be interested for you what your experience, especially since we talked about your transition right from automotive, what has your experience been like as you think about the work that you're doing from the inside out, but also as a consumer then looking back in and seeing how that factors into the overall either brand loyalty or customer experience, how those two perspectives come together?
Yeah, for sure. So I think although in marketing, savings and the cost, etc., isn't always number one, I think it always does play a very, very huge part when it does come to sourcing activities, when you think of it from a customer side. So essentially, the more we're spending, the more risk there is to the customer. We want to be able to ensure that we're driving the most value for the business, but also for our customers, and keeping the costs at a lower cost, essentially. So for me, when we were working on certain projects and I'm thinking to myself, what value is this bringing to the customer? Or we're thinking of bringing on a new agency to work on a certain project, I think, okay, well, what what's the value we're getting out of this? How does that affect the end customer? And obviously it's very hard in marketing, like we've said, like working on certain projects, it could be something very high level that filters down and is be able to essentially feed into another area, to feed into another, to be able to come to that result. So it might be on a 3-tier kind of project base as such. But I think as a customer myself, I think being able to really understand a little bit more around certain areas what we work on, looking at the strategy of how that really filters in, I think, yeah, it does play a huge part. And we're able to, I don't know, I think it feeds more into that kind of consolidation and being able to challenge our stakeholders and have that seat at the table of really saying, I don't know what this brings, so how would our customer know what this brings, essentially?
Right.
So yeah, it is a bit of a challenging one in marketing, but I think, as I said before, with Sainsburys, they've always made sure that we put the customer at the forefront of what we do, and I think that kind of comes in through the consolidation, through that strategic sourcing piece, and really having that seat at the table to be able to challenge the norm.
And that ability to challenge is a key part of how procurement creates value. One of the things that you mentioned when we spoke previously is that you're passionate about finding new ways for procurement to work, new ways for procurement to create value, add value, articulate value. When you think about the work that you're doing, what does that passion, those new ways of working, end up looking like in practice?
Yeah, so I think I've touched on it previously, but I think procurement over the years has probably been considered more of an admin role. We're kind of here to just raise the POs and that's it. Whereas I think over time we have been transitioning, and we have now, the world is, there's so much pressure on costs, so much pressure on retaining the right customers, and growing as such, and ensuring that the triple bottom line, people, profit, and the planet is, there's so many things now that pressures within a business. I think it's now more than ever so important to have that procurement function. And I feel like over time we have really been able to have that seat at the table, really challenge how we see things. And I think it has really developed over time. Recently I was having a look and I saw that the Modern Slavery Act only came in 2015. So you've got that other side of it, that yes, we've got the cost driving aspects, we've got the consolidation of suppliers, etc., and being able to deliver that for our customers. But it's also that ensuring that we are fair to our suppliers and we're sourcing the right suppliers, ensuring that modern slavery Act is carried out, and ensuring that we're ethically sourcing our suppliers. So there's that other big portion of it that we work with in the background to ensure that we're doing all the right due diligence with our suppliers and making sure that that they are being treated fairly as part of that process. So I think, yeah, there has been a really big shift in procurement over the years, and it's becoming more and more important than ever to make sure that we really are supporting not only the business but also the agencies and suppliers that we do work with as well.
Now, given that evolution of the profession, do you think we're getting closer to sort of a procurement type, somebody that wants to work in procurement? Is that starting to come into focus? Or do you actually think that the evolution of procurement has made it increasingly possible for almost anybody to come into procurement and use their background, their perspective to help create value? What would your observation be on sort of a career progression or professional level?
Yeah, so again, I think that's also shifted quite a lot. I think probably over the years it might have been quite a male-dominated industry. When you maybe look back through job descriptions, it says you need to have, strong negotiation skills, X, Y, Z, which, yeah, in all fairness, you do need to have that. But I think procurement is so much more than just having kind of these technical skills. I think procurement comes from being able to work with people, essentially, being able to work with a range of different people, being able to communicate effectively. You need to be able to be organized and have that analytical mindset and not be afraid to challenge the norm. So I am passionate that I do think there are so many different avenues within procurement, and I think it is very much shifting from a kind of job role itself, but also the people that do work in procurement. And I think it's so important to have that diversity within a workforce and be able to feel like you've got a safe space to challenge the norm. Definitely.
And yet we definitely shouldn't minimize just how hard it is. I mean, in my opinion, of all the categories, I think marketing is one of the most difficult, not just to manage, but to manage well. If you were to think about the relationships that you've built and the forms of value that you've both helped create and also communicate, what advice would you offer to listeners that are in any category at all, looking at something more value oriented and trying to think about how to strengthen those relationships, how to build the trust, how to talk about potential or realized value? Is there a piece of advice or a learning that you'd want to leave people with on that front?
I would say really understand what your role is in the business and what you're wanting to achieve and be able to deliver for your stakeholders, and really portraying that to them. Because I think a lot of the time where there might be a bit of friction between procurement and the business is because the business side might not understand exactly what procurement do, and that's absolutely fine because it's still a very much upcoming function, I would say. And people might just look at procurement to say, oh, here they are, they're just trying to cut our costs again.
Them
They're
again.
take my budget away. Yeah. But it's not like that at all. We're here to support. And I think being able to work with your stakeholders and say, look, this is what I'm here to do. I'm here to support you. I'm not here to run away with your money and send it back to the business. I'm here to be able to deliver that value. And also getting them to say, well, this is what we're trying to do. This is where we're trying to get to. Asking them what their pain points are. Have they got agencies that probably aren't performing, and do they need some support in being able to, put some SLAs in place to be able to support them? And I think really bridging that gap is such a good start point between your stakeholders and yourself, and being able to determine this is what the value I'm going to deliver for the business, and this is how I want to support you. But to do that, I need you on board to be able to trust me and be transparent with me as we work through this process. To have that collaborative approach. But I definitely think that's number one, because we're not the enemies. We're here to help.
And we should say
yeah.
that's now official. Procurement is definitely not the enemy. We have worked so hard to build these relationships. And if I guess someone has experienced a procurement that is the enemy, the challenge might be a little bit greater to forge that relationship. But it also probably means that the potential ROI, value creation, is even better. So Adele, I want to thank you for taking some time to share your story and share your perspective. And of course, for joining me for this episode of the Love Procurement Podcast.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.